Canadians know we embarked on this journey 4 years ago now. We decided to throw our hat in the ring because we saw a unique opportunity to engage with our partners across the UN, build sustainable peace, and make real progress on issues that matter. And that's what we've gotten to do during this campaign. We forged new partnerships, we strengthened existing friendships, and we laid a solid foundation for an even greater collaboration in the future. And that's never been more critical. Now, more than ever, global cooperation is crucial not only to defeat the virus, but to address the great challenges of our time, challenges that transcend borders. Growing our economies, mitigating the impacts of climate change, building a lasting peace, advancing gender equality, protecting our citizens. We have to engage with partners to achieve these goals. Getting this seat was never an end in itself, but rather a means to an end. A means to ensure that our voice was heard and that our values upheld on the world stage. The bid was certainly one way to achieve this, but it's far from the only way. Moving forward, Canadians can count on us to keep working with our partners to make progress internationally on issues that matter to them.
First of all, I'd like to commend all the new non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Even though Canada is not part of that group, I would like to take a moment to talk about the work that we accomplished in that area. As Canadians know, we have been working on this for 4 years. We decided to throw our hat in the ring because we saw it as a unique opportunity to collaborate with our partners in the UN and to build a sustainable peace and make concrete progress on issues that are important to Canada. And that's exactly what we did during the campaign. We forged new partnerships. We strengthened our ties of friendship with various countries, and we laid the foundation for greater cooperation in future. And that has never been as important as it is now. Today, more than ever, global cooperation is critical, not only to defeat the virus, but also to meet the major challenges of our time, challenges that know no borders. We will be working with partners, and we must, if we want to fight climate change, bring in sustainable peace, advance gender equality, and protect our own citizens. Securing a seat was never an end in itself, but rather a way of getting to our goals, a way of ensuring that our voice would be heard and our values would be upheld on the global stage. Sitting on the UN Security Council was one way of doing that, but it's not the only way. Canadians can always rely on us to continue to work with our partners to advance the issues of importance to us.
Across the country, we're starting to reopen parts of the economy, and that's welcome news for everyone. But as we start loosening some restrictions, we also have to strengthen other measures so that we don't lose the progress we've made. As some people start heading back to work, testing and contact tracing is crucial. That's why we've been working with the provinces and territories to ensure that they have everything they need to keep people safe and healthy. And today, we're taking an important step forward toward containing the virus and safely restarting the economy. Led by the Canadian Digital Service and with the help of Shopify, BlackBerry, and the Government of Ontario, we've been working on a nationwide mobile app that will notify users if they've been exposed to COVID-19. We will soon begin testing this app in Ontario. There are already a number of other provinces, including BC, who are working with us on this, but it will be available to everyone in the coming weeks. Premier Ford will have more to say on how the app will work in Ontario later today, but I want to thank him and his government for their leadership and partnership. Now, I want to stress that this app will be completely voluntary. It'll be up to individual Canadians to decide whether to download the app or not. But the app will be most effective when as many people as possible have it. Here's how it's going to work. If you test positive for COVID-19, a healthcare professional will help you upload your status anonymously to a national network. Other users who have the app and have been in proximity to you will then be alerted that they've been exposed to someone who's tested positive. The notification will encourage them to reach out to their local public health authorities. At no time will personal information be collected or shared, and no location services will be used. The privacy of Canadians will be fully respected.
Today, we are moving forward with a view to containing the virus and safely reopening the economy. Led by Canadian Digital Service in cooperation with Shopify, BlackBerry, and the Government Ontario, we are developing a mobile application to be used all across Canada that will inform users if they have been exposed to COVID-19. Soon, we will be testing that application in Ontario. A number of provinces, including British Columbia, are already working with us, and the application will be available right across the country in the coming days. This application will be fully voluntary, not mandatory, but it will be more efficient if it is downloaded by as many people as possible. Now, this is how it's going to work. If you receive a positive COVID-19 test, a healthcare professional will help you upload your status anonymously to a national network. Other users who have the application and have been in proximity to you will be alerted to the fact that they have been exposed to someone who tested positive. That alert will encourage them to contact their local public health authorities. No personal information will be either collected or shared, and no location services will be used. Canadians' privacy will be respected at all times. For a number of weeks now, we have started to reopen certain segments of the economy, but the recovery is presenting certain challenges for some sectors. I'm thinking in particular of the cultural industry. Since the beginning of this crisis, our government has been there for artists, creators, and the people who work in that industry. The Canada Council for the Arts believes that the cultural industry has received, all in all, more than $2.5 billion, particularly through programs such as the emergency wage subsidy and the response benefit. We granted $500 to that industry to help our artists and rising stars in the sports area to get the support they need. And we are starting a portal today that will be open. Now, any organizations that want to have funding can now apply on the government site. We are making significant progress, but we also know there's still a great deal to be done. In recent months, our museums have seen losses, major losses of revenues, which is threatening the jobs of a lot of people. So our government decided to make a new investment of $25.7 million to maintain almost 200 jobs in 7 museums, national museums across the country. Our museums tell our stories, pay tribute to our artists, and enrich our communities. The people who work in those institutions preserve our Canadian heritage. They allow us to learn about our past and to discover the people who have marked our country.
Our government has been closely monitoring the spread of the virus, its impacts on our economy, and making the right adjustments along the way. We're going to keep listening to Canadians and look for other ways to support them as the situation evolves. I'm happy now to take your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phones first for questions. One question, one follow-up. Over to you, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous.
Good morning, Prime Minister. The UN Security Council, you said a few years ago, Canada is back, and yet yesterday you got fewer votes than the Harper government did in 2010. How do you explain that? Well, for a number of years now, we have been engaging with the rest of the world at many different levels because that is in Canadians' interests, and it's in the interest of the entire world for Canada to have a strong voice, whether it be on climate change, change or economic development in the most vulnerable countries or gender equality or help for the most vulnerable, Canada, for a number of years now, has been doing much more. Of course, we would have very much liked to continue to raise our voice even more within the Security Council, but we've seen in recent years that Canada was having a positive impact, and we will continue to work on that. Now, there's no doubt that this is not the result that I was hoping for, but the partnerships, the work we've done, and our engagement in recent years will certainly continue to serve us in the future. Follow-up, Ray? That doesn't answer my question. How do you explain the fact that Canada received fewer votes and failed in its attempt to secure a seat? Is this not the sign that you were unable to improve Canada's reputation? Well, we knew when we jumped into this race that our two competitors, Norway and Ireland, whom I called to congratulate on their success last evening, had 4 or 5 years of pre-entry into the race. And we did make a lot of progress, but the fact is that we were too far behind to win this. Of course, it is a disappointment, but what we were able to do in recent years by being more engaged on the world stage was secure positive results for Canadians and for people around the world. And we will continue to work with our partners, with our new friends, with other countries in the world to defend multilateralism at a time of turbulence and uncertainty in the world.
Obviously, we would have hoped for a different result yesterday. We've worked very, very hard over these past years to deepen our friendships and create new partnerships on really big issues, from climate change to help for the most vulnerable to women's equality to a range of other issues that is moving the world forward in ways that matter to Canadians both here at home and around the world. Obviously, I was pleased to be able to call Ireland and Norway last night in the this morning to congratulate them for a well-run campaign and commit to them that we were going to continue to work with them on all our shared values on the world stage. But the reality was coming in 5 years later than them gave us a delay that we unfortunately weren't able to overcome. I was hoping we would, and we certainly worked hard to do it, but what we were able to do over the few years with this campaign was strengthen and deepen many, many ties and the impact that Canada has around the world in particularly turbulent times. We will remain committed to multilateralism, to engaging constructively and positively in the world, because it's something that matters to Canadians, and it also matters to many, many countries around the world that Canada continues to be present and defending multilateralism.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask about the lack of disaggregated data about our economic recovery. Statistics Canada recently suspended its job vacancy and wage survey because its resources are being stretched so thin. That project's existed for for years. It's been much more detailed than the labor force survey. Your departments are also not publishing any data on how the CERB, the wage subsidy, or the commercial rent subsidy are being taken up by province or by gender. This recovery differs by region, but it seems like we're flying blind. So I'm wondering if you're going to divert resources so we can actually measure the recovery more precisely.
We know that solid data is the foundation for making the right public policy decisions. This is a very difficult time with COVID-19, where we've had to set up new systems and adjust old systems to better respond, and our focus every step of the way needed to be on getting the help out to Canadians. But at the same time, we've been working closely with Statistics Canada on collecting better data, and we've been working also with the provinces to enable them to get data that is able to be collated at the federal level. We know that we need better data. We need more disaggregated, race-based data, and this is what we continue to work on right now. There's still, as you point out, much improvement to be made, but we are very much focused on understanding how we're doing so that we can get through this even better.
Follow-up, Dylan?
And And Prime Minister, I wanted to talk about police forces under provincial jurisdiction. The Winnipeg police have shot and killed 3 Indigenous people in recent months. They were filmed last week kicking a man while he was held down. Your Minister, Dan Vandal, said he's revolted by these incidents, that little has changed over 2 decades in Winnipeg, and he said that your government needs to lead the way in combating what he calls police brutality. So I'm wondering what action you'll take beyond the RCMP and if you'll be pressing Premier Pallister on this in your call this evening.
Last week and certainly again tonight, we will be talking about our shared responsibility over various police services across this country and the need to address systemic racism that exists in all of our institutions, including all of our police forces. That's why I know that it can't just be a federal issue, although there is plenty for us to do at the federal side. We do need to work with all partners on this. This is why we're going to continue to talk not just about making strong statements about committing to fight systemic discrimination within our jurisdictions, but we're also going to be talking about concrete actions that need to be taken at different levels of government right across the country in order to make sure that racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians don't continue to suffer the kind of daily lived reality of discrimination that is all too common.
Tonight, once again, I will be speaking to the premiers of systemic discrimination and our collective responsibility for various levels of police services. And we're going to be talking about making the necessary changes. Certainly, the federal government has a lot of work to do and many levers we can use to improve things concretely, but we must work with the other levels of government, and that's what we will do. Not just to commit to doing better, but to develop concrete plans and actions that will allow us to improve the situation for Canadians facing discrimination on an almost daily basis.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Christy Kirkup, The Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Do you believe the RCMP disproportionately uses force against Indigenous peoples, and if so, why?
I think we've seen data that suggests that Indigenous people are at greater risk of mistreatment or excessive force used by police services, including the RCMP, across the country. And that's just a clear and vivid illustration of systemic racism, systemic discrimination that exists within our country and across a range of institutions. We need to work hard to address this, to change the protocols. I've had conversations with the Commissioner of the RCMP on this, and I know I'm going to have the opportunity to speak with provincial premiers tonight on what we can do in various police forces across this country. This is something we do need to address, and soon and rapidly.
We recognize that this is a reality for racialized and Indigenous Canadians to be more often the victims of aggression or injurious actions by the police. We must address this problem, which is a clear illustration of systemic discrimination and racism that exists within our institutions. And that's why I am having conversations with the Commissioner of the RCMP, but also with the premiers of the provinces, so that we can take concrete action to better serve and protect minority Canadians.
Follow-up, Christy?
And Prime Minister, there are now calls for an independent investigation to be launched by your government of the RCMP's conduct, including its use of force against Indigenous peoples. Is your government on board?
As I've said many times, we are going to be taking strong, bold, concrete actions to go at systemic discrimination in this country, and that includes measures within our justice system, measures around policing, but also measures around economic opportunity and community supports. There is a range of things that we need to do to counter systemic discrimination, the lived reality of far too many racialized and Indigenous Canadians who suffer every single day. We need to do much more, and that's why we are working with them to establish rapidly the concrete actions we're going to move forward with shortly.
Thank you. And we'll take one more question on the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. You will be speaking to the premiers this evening, in particular about systemic racism. Mr. Legault in Quebec is refusing to acknowledge that there is systemic racism. Mr. Singh called a Bloc MP a racist yesterday in the House, saying that refusing to acknowledge the existence of systemic racism is to be a racist. Do you agree with that? Well, first of all, I am extremely disappointed that the Bloc Québécois continues not to recognize and acknowledge that systemic racism exists in Canada, right across the country, in all our institutions. I think the first step is to recognize that there is a problem in order to be able to address it, and I do hope that the Bloc and other organizations and levels of government will recognize that systemic discrimination and racism exist in order to be better able to address it. Now, with respect to what Mr. Singh said, it's not up to me to say to a racialized Canadian what to say or do when a question of racism arises. I think many Canadians are facing racism, and these are conversations that make people uncomfortable, of course, but they're conversations that have to happen if we want to move forward as a country.
First of all, it is disappointing that the Bloc Québécois continues to refuse to accept that systemic discrimination, systemic racism exists within our country, in every part of our country, and in all our institutions. Recognizing systemic discrimination is the important first step towards being able to address it and ensure better opportunities, outcomes, and lived realities for racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians particularly. In regards to what Mr. Singh said, it is not for me to criticize any Canadian, particularly not the only racialized leader in the House of Commons, for making other people uncomfortable by calling them out for not recognizing systemic discrimination. I think we need to recognize that these conversations are going to make people uncomfortable. But it has been the lived reality of racialized and Indigenous Canadians for far too long. And we need to continue to move forward in a way that attempts to bring people together. But yes, we are going to make some people uneasy with recognizing things have to change.
Suivi, Marie?
Oui, merci. Et donc,
yes. Okay, so you're disappointed that the Bloc does not recognize the existence of racism in institutions, but what about François Legault? Well, I think that right across this country, there are different individuals who are at different stages in terms of recognizing that racism exists, but I think the conversations we're having now and the strong voices that are being heard, talking about the problems that are here and the need to find solutions, will reassure us that we are moving in the right direction and that everyone can understand the work that is ahead of us and get down to it.
Continue to be people across the country who struggle with the idea of systemic discrimination, but the sooner we recognize that it exists and that we need to move forward together, the more we listen to the lived reality of racialized Canadians, of Indigenous Canadians, the more we understand the challenges that are being faced every single day in our institutions, in our country, the more we are going to be able to address them and improve our country and actually be more the country that we all know we want to be in our hearts.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. Now, even in countries where those tracing apps are used and are most popular, only 40% of people are using them, and that's not enough for it to be helpful, says public health in those countries. Now, British Columbia has dropped this for privacy reasons. Why do you think that Canadians will be more interested in subscribing to that application and that we will not see the same failure as elsewhere? Now, in terms of the experiences with this type of app elsewhere in the world, I think they were based on a telephone app, and the application had to remain active on the phone in order to work. Obviously, that used much too much power from the battery. It was complicated to use, but this application is based on a change made by Google and Apple to their operational systems, which means you can download the application and forget all about it. You don't need to do anything for the application to work. So if you test positive anonymously, a code will be developed that will make it clear to people who were in proximity to you that they have been exposed. You'll receive an alert from someone if you were in proximity to someone who tested positive, and at that point you can call the public health department. So this is a very, very simple application. We drew lessons from what other people did around the world in that area, and we know that this type of simple and anonymous application that is entirely voluntary will be extremely powerful in terms of helping us to reopen the economy safely.
Over the past months, we've seen a number of different applications put forward by various jurisdictions around the world that, you're right, didn't really work all that well. Some of the challenges were that these applications needed to sit in the foreground of your phone and therefore drained batteries, and you had to work to keep them active quite regularly. In the past weeks, Apple and Google put out major upgrades to their operating systems that allow this application to work in the background. So you don't have to do anything around this application other than download it. If you test positive, they will plug in a code that alerts any phone that has been close to yours that you have now tested positive. And if you have a phone that alerts you that you may have been in proximity with someone who subsequently tested positive, you can just call public health and they'll work through the next steps that you have to do. It's something you can just download and forget about. And because it's completely anonymous, because it's low maintenance, because it is completely respectful of your privacy, including no location services or geotagging of any sort, people can be confident that this is a easy measure that they can have to continue to keep us all safe as we reopen, as we get more active. This is an approach that we are confident is going to make a big difference, and Canadians can do this and forget about it.
One of the concerns of people is privacy. So you say that the data will be protected, but I'm trying to understand, where will that data be stored? Will they be on safe servers? And has the Privacy Commissioner been involved in this decision? And how will you convince the other provinces that are reluctant to get on board with this? Well, in terms of the application, there are three parts to this. First of all, there's the application itself, which will be a national application that will be adjusted for each province that wants to use it, so that people can receive information from local health authorities. But the application will be national in nature, and it will be usable right across the country, whether you're in Ontario, BC, or a visitor in the country. It will continue to work. Second, the data bank will be held by the federal government,
and it will contain only the anonymous codes associated with various phones. There is no personal information stored, nothing that can identify you. It will just be a code that will be associated with a positive test or no positive test associated with that code. So the register will be controlled by Canadian Digital Services within the federal government, entirely safe and secure, and only in Canada. The third part is public health departments in every province and territory. Their responsibility will be that when a test happens, that the code is developed anonymously, saying that this phone is associated with a positive test. And then after that, if someone receives an alert telling them that they could have been in contact with someone who has tested positive, then they will call public health and say, I think I may have been in contact with someone who has tested positive. What should I do now? And the public health department will look after that person. So it's completely anonymous. It's entirely rigorous. Yes, we worked with the Privacy Commissioner on this. We worked with BlackBerry, with Shopify, to ensure that everything would be private and anonymous. And people can have confidence that this will be a very, very helpful tool in helping us to be more effective in contact tracing.
I think the way to think about this app is actually in three different sections. One is the national app that everyone can download that will be customized for each province, but it will be one app that whether you download it and live in Ontario and travel to BC or travel to the Northwest Territories, if that becomes an option, it'll work everywhere across the country. So it's one app for all Canadians, and there are over 30 million smartphones that could take this app in Canada. So we can talk about a significant portion of the Canadian population that could be protected by this app that you can download and then forget about. The second part of it is obviously the national database. There will be a database of randomized codes associated with each smartphone that has this app that will be divided into two columns, those who may have tested positive and those who have not tested positive. So if your phone gets in proximity for a certain amount of time at a certain closeness to another phone, it'll register that it has had contact with that anonymized number, not a phone number, but an anonymized identifier for the app. A few days later, if that person you were in proximity with tested positive, you will get a notification to reach out to your local health services. So the third part of that app is the local, provincial, or territorial health services that will ensure that when someone tests positive and they have the app is notified that that random number associated with your phone goes into the red column. On top of that, if you are notified that you were, over the past few days, in proximity with someone who then tested positive, you'll be encouraged to call your local health authorities to say, I think I just got an alert that I was in proximity with someone who looks like they just tested positive. What do I do? And the local health authority will walk you through that. And it's completely separate from the app at that point. It's the same thing as if you realize that your grocer that you just had a conversation with 2 days ago suddenly tested positive, and you should probably call your local health authorities. So it's an extra tool that helps people move forward with confidence that we're going to be able to track and trace more of the exposure or the potential sharing of the COVID-19 virus around the country. It is an extra layer of protection that goes on top of everything else we're already doing, and that's why we're encouraging people to download the app once it becomes available in early July.
Hi, Prime Minister Tom Perry, CBC. Is there a level that you're trying to hit in terms of the number of people downloading the app? And if they don't, you don't reach that level, is there a plan B?
I think any amount of people that download it will be useful for that person and for our society. But that's certain that if we can talk about a 50% update, for example, uptake or more, then it becomes extraordinarily useful, not just for having people know that, oh, okay, they were in proximity with someone who then tested positive, so they should reach out to public health, but it'll actually allow us to have a better sense of when there are spikes or resurgences of a virus in a particular area or not, because more people will be getting that notification and calling their local public health authorities. So any level of uptake would be useful, but because it is such a simple procedure, you download it for free, you leave it in the back of your phone, and you forget about it until suddenly it tells you, oh, you may have been in proximity with someone who since tested positive. Reach out to your public health authority. It's something that we expect that a lot of Canadians are going to realize here is a tangible thing they can do to keep us safer as we move forward in the reopening. Okay. Évidemment,
of course, this is a tool that will be more useful if a lot of people decide to download the app. If we get over 50%, it could really have a transforming effect. But even if there are only a few people that do it, it will be a tool, an additional tool that will help us to carry out contact tracing. The fact is, it's so easy. You just have to download the app and then forget about it. The application will then completely anonymously alert you and to tell you you may have been in contact with someone who tested positive for the virus. At that point, you can call the public health authorities to ask them what you should do. And so it has so many benefits for the individual and for society as a whole without any downside, because it's anonymous. There are no location services or geographic services used. It's completely within the control of the user, and it's completely secure. So we are expecting a lot of Canadians to want to do their part very simply, because if there is a new outbreak of COVID-19 in one location, very quickly, with people who are receiving an alert right away that they may have been in contact with someone who tested positive, then they can take action.
Is there a plan B? And I mean, how much more complicated does that make contact tracing?
Contact tracing, as it is right now, is being done with hundreds and even thousands of people across the country who are doing it manually, and that will continue. What this app provides is an extra layer of effort that is removed. If someone has the app and is notified by the app that the person that they contacted with or this person they sat next to in a cafe subsequently tested positive, that prevents that person in the cafe from having to explain, well, I was in the cafe at this particular time, and I think Jim from down the street was sitting next to me. Maybe you should call them to tell them that they might have been exposed to me. The app does that automatically. So it is a layer of additional effort, but it is in addition to all the contact tracing that we're doing right now, all the control we're having. It adds to our capacities in a very useful way if there is strong uptake, but what we're doing as it is continues.
Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. I just want to go back to yesterday in the House, Prime Minister. I want to ask you, do you think that Alain Terrien with the Bloc Québécois was racist by voting against the motion from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh that there's systemic racism in the RCMP?
I think it remains problematic that the Bloc Québécois refuses to recognize systemic racism in the RCMP and in this country. The first step is recognizing that there is a problem so that we can address it, and it is unfortunate that they continue to resist recognizing the lived reality of millions of Canadians who are Indigenous or racialized.
But you won't comment on your opinion on what you think that action means. Do you think that that action in the House, by purposely voting against the motion do you think by that in itself, this is what Mr. Singh is alleging, of course, that in itself was racist?
I think, first of all, that's something for the Bloc Québécois members themselves to explain why they continue to resist recognizing the lived reality of far too many people that systemic discrimination does exist in this country. Secondly, in regards to Mr. Singh, I think it is important that we recognize that racialized Canadians whose lived reality is discrimination and microaggression all too often, are allowed to make people uncomfortable in bringing out these issues. I think it's important that we recognize when the only racialized leader in the House of Commons, makes a statement like that, that it comes from a place that, yes, will make people uncomfortable, but needs to be dealt with as we move forward as a country. Okay. Je pense que c'est au Bloc québécois d'expliquer.
I think it's up to the Bloc Québécois to explain why they do not believe that lived reality of millions of Canadians who face racism and discrimination does not exist. Systemic racism and discrimination, why they believe it does not exist. There are Canadians of diverse origins, such as the leader of the NDP, who face discrimination and know that discrimination exists in Canada, and who may say things that make some people uncomfortable. But that is part of the process through which we can move forward in order to understand there is a problem and start to tackle it together. And I hope the Bloc Québécois will understand that we must work together on this in order to address the injurious effects of systemic racism.
Janet Silver, Global News. I want to go back to the app that you just announced, and you said that the privacy of Canadians will be fully respected. I'm wondering whether or not the Privacy Commissioner has been involved with this new app, and if he has not, will he be? And also, do you have buy-in from all the provinces?
The Privacy Commissioner has been worked with on this app. It is extremely important that we make sure that Canadians' privacy is protected, not just for their sake, but because we know that uptake of this app won't be there if people are worried for their privacy. That's why it functions entirely on an anonymized basis. There are no identifiers of your phone, of your number, of your identity, of your address, or even of your location that is any part of this app. A random code associated with your phone will be held in a secure national database that will be consulted by the apps across the country to see whether that randomized code has tested positive for COVID or not. If it has tested positive, your phone will tell you that, oh, you've been in proximity with someone who subsequently tested positive for COVID, so you should probably call your local health authority. That's what it is. It's super simple, it's super secure, and we've worked very, very carefully to ensure that it is that way. It will be available as of the beginning of July right across the country. The app is there. The national database of anonymized data is there to be consulted by the app right across the country. The third part of the app is integration into the local public health services, so that when someone is tested positive, that the app is notified that they are tested positive. That requires working with the provinces on that. We have a number of provinces already moved forward on that, but even if you're visiting a province that does not have the app, you can still make sure that you're being protected, because people who have the app in that province, even if their public health authority hasn't signed on to it, but who are in contact with someone from Ontario who then goes back to Ontario and tests positive, they'll be notified that they had been exposed to someone who had the app. Obviously, it'll work better once all provinces and territories are part of it, because what we've seen from other jurisdictions is when you can have one clear, extremely simple, download and forget about it app that is totally secure and completely anonymized, and yet an extremely effective tool to continue in a safe reopening of our economy, the uptake will be quite high right across the country. Okay. L'application va être disponible.
This application will be available right across Canada starting on July 1st. The National Registry or the National Data Bank of anonymized data associated with each phone will be in place, but we need the provinces to work with us so that public health officials can register a unique anonymous code for someone who tested positive in order for the people that person has been in contact with to receive an alert telling them they have to speak to their local public health authorities. Now, even if you're in a province where they have not taken the step of ensuring public health notification. If someone is visiting from Ontario, for example, and you both have the application, and proximity has been established, when that person returns to Ontario and tests positive, and there the application sends a notification, even in that province that doesn't have that system, you will be notified that you may have been in contact with someone who tested positive. So this is a tool that works much better when all the provinces and territories are part of the system. But even if your province or territory does not have it yet, once it starts, it will be useful to have, and we do expect that Canadians right across the country will get on board, as well as provinces and territories, when they see that it is a simple system that can help them to protect their own citizens.
We now have over 100,000 people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and there are still discrepancies across the country, even within communities, as to where and when you wear a mask. I'm wondering whether or not your government has any regrets that we didn't ask Canadians to wear masks sooner. And as we head into a possible second wave, what more you can do to encourage people to wear masks when they go out?
I think in the first months of this COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we were very strongly encouraging people to stay home, to not go out, and to keep very rigidly socially distanced when they did go out for groceries or for whatever reasons they had to go out for. We were concerned, I think public health authorities were concerned that masks could give a false sense of security that might not arrest the spread of COVID-19 as effectively as being properly isolated actually did. But now, as people are re-engaging in society, as we have succeeded in flattening the curve, there is more opportunity for people to go out and wear a mask as they do. I think we need to remember that masks do not protect you as much as staying home would, or as keeping a full 2 meters distance from each other, but it is an additional measure that we see more and more Canadians using right across the country in order to keep them safe and to keep their loved ones safe. Je pense que
I believe that when the pandemic started, the priority was to keep people home, because the best way of preventing the virus from spreading was, in fact, to keep people at home and to make sure they didn't go out unless it was absolutely necessary. So the idea that wearing a mask could give people a false sense of security or protection was definitely a concern for many people in public health. But now that we have succeeded in flattening the curve in a significant manner right across the country in most locations, and we're starting to reopen the economy locally and regionally, and people are starting to return to work, we realize that the best way of preventing the spread is to stay at home and practice physical distancing. But at the same time, it is recommended to wear a mask if you are going to be close to people, because that can continue to limit the spread of COVID-19 without making you invulnerable, of course. So that has to be kept in mind. I know that we're seeing a lot more people now who are wearing masks when they go out into public or when they're next to others, and they may keep their mask in their pocket and put it on when they go into a store. But it's up to people to do this, and this is the kind of behavior that will help us to fight COVID-19. Thank you all very much.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Thursday. The primary announcement today around a contact tracing app that is called COVID Shield. It has been developed by volunteers who work at Shopify. It is not a Shopify app, but